You've got all 6 books for the Legacy of Fire. You've been building up to this moment for months. The party has finally opened the MacGuffin. And now they're trapped inside a demiplane created by Nex himself. So the question is this epic journey to another world everything it's promised to be? Or is it just another hex crawler? Today we're finding out. Hello, and welcome to the channel. I am GM Winslow. Today we are going to take a deep dive into Legacy of Fire, Book 4, The End of Eternity. When I first read through the adventure, this was the part I was the most excited to run. A demiplane, created by Nex, an entirely new discoverable world. But once I actually got my players into Kakishon, I was surprised. It felt empty. And my group burned through the content way faster than I expected. Now, in the past, Paizo has a reputation of cutting material to meet a strict page count. And in my opinion, The End of Eternity really shows it. But first, let's talk about the author, Jason Nelson. He's a longtime freelance game designer who made it to the top 4 in Paizo's RPG Superstar competition back in 2008. And if you've played a few adventure paths, you've probably seen his work before. He's also written War of the River Kings, The Hungry Storm, From Hell's Heart, along with a ton of bestiary content. Outside of Paizo, he contributed to Dragon and Dungeon magazines, and even wrote the behind the screen and Save My Game columns for Wizards of the Coast. So yeah, it's a very experienced designer stepping in for Book 4. So, once the MacGuffin is finally opened, the heroes are violently and cinematically ripped from Galarion and pulled into the hidden world of Kakishon. As they're dragged through the portal, they catch their first true glimpse of the campaign's big evil villain and realize just how big this story is about to get. They awaken on a beautiful tropical beach, disorientated and stranded. As they shake the sand from their boots and take in their surroundings, the reality of their situation starts to sink in. This is not just another location. This is an entirely different world. After an early encounter, the party meets one of the most unusual quest givers in the entire adventure path, who sets them on their first mission across the land. Completing this objective unlocks the real core of the adventure, and freedom to explore Kakishon. From there, the campaign opens into a sprawling sandbox. The heroes encounter multiple factions, all trapped within this world and all searching for a way out. Through alliances, missions, and hard choices, the party must decide who to support and who to destroy. Ultimately, their choices determine how they escape Kakishon, and whether they can return to Galarion in time to stop Javul, the powerful Afridi warlord they must have just released. Now, let's break this book down beat by beat. First off, this is going to be another wonky transition point in the campaign. The moment your players open the scroll, you need to be ready to run The End of Eternity immediately. That can absolutely happen mid-session. So, my advice, you should have Kakishon fully prepped before your players even finish Book 2, House of the Beast. Because if your group is anything like mine, they might figure it out early and skip content. My party actually opened the scroll ahead of schedule and skipped half of Book 3, The Jackal's Price. Part 2 is your starting quest, the moment the adventure really begins. The party lands in what looks like a tropical paradise. But it's full of monsters. That's when things kind of get weird. One of Kakishon's original creators shows up in disguise and literally vomits up the quest item. That sends the party on a hunt for the Golden Bull. And once they kill it and gain the horn, which unlocks the Kakishon's water taxi system and really begins to open up the map. The sandbox really opens up parts 3 through 7. From here, the adventure becomes location-based. This is where Kakishon will turn into a sandbox. The party will have a chance to meet both factions. They'll get to learn where they're from and figure out if they really want to decide to trust them and figure out how to reach them. And ultimately decide who to trust and who to betray. Part 3 is really about Javul's legacy. This section is going to take place in Javul's old territory. You meet the slaves and serpents that he abandoned when he escaped. Through them, you start to understand who Javul was, what he did here, and what kind of threat he really is. It's also your first real introduction to the faction conflict happening inside Kakishon. In Part 4, you get to meet the secret craters. This is where things get morally interesting. You meet the true creators of Kakishon, beings enslaved by Nex to build the demiplane. They've been trapped here for centuries. And when you hear their story, it's very hard not to side with them. Their goal? Well, destroy Kakishon entirely and finally escape. Which turns this into a full campaign theme moment, because now we're dealing with slavery, freedom, and the consequences across the entire adventure path. Part 5 is the Isle of the Dead. Here, you visit the site where Andrathi was killed, and Nex's unfinished tomb. This section is going to give you a second perspective on the factions, more lore about Javul, and a deeper understanding of what went wrong in Kakishon. Part 6, the Fire Forge. This is fantastic prep chapter for later books. You travel to a volcanic island and meet a blacksmith Javul never paid. He sends you on a quest that helps prepare the party for fighting fire outsiders, which becomes extremely relevant in Book 5 and 6. Part 7 is set up as the final dungeon. This is the stronghold of the Sand Genies, or the Shaitans. Originally loyal to Javul, they eventually betrayed him and carved out their own territory in Kakishon. The more interesting part is your players could come here early and completely change the structure of the campaign, depending upon their choices. This becomes the final dungeon, or Part 4 becomes the final confrontation instead. The flexibility in one of the books is probably its biggest strengths. At the end of the book, the players have a choice. If the players side with the Craters and destroy Kakishon, it's far more cinematic, and it leads perfectly into Book 5, The Impossible Eye. There will also be additional content in the book. The book also includes Rules for Binding Genies by Wolfgang Bauer, a deep dive on the Proteans, the creators of Kakishon, and a major set-piece encounter, the Waves of Kakishon. And I'll be honest, this one's basically mandatory. Kakishon can feel a little empty at times, so you need that dragon-turtle encounter to bring the seas to life. As always, in Pathfinder 1st Edition, they include short stories. This short story is called Gemstones. It continues to follow Chana T, who gets pulled into a mystery involving a dancer named Lapis, a magical gem, and a pirate attack. By the end, she discovers Lapis is far more dangerous than she appears, and the story pivots into revenge after the murder of her mentor. What I would do differently is more preparation. Before my players even step into the House of the Beast Book 2, I already have Kakishon fully built out in the background. Not every detail, but enough that when they arrive, it feels like a real living world instead of a disconnected sandbox. Bring Kakishon to life. Kakishon should feel like a vibrant, desperate world, not just a series of islands. So what I recommend is build out custom locations for each island the players potentially could visit. Create mini arcs and story hooks. Add memorable NPCs with goals and agendas. And then tie everything back into a central theme. Everyone here is trying to escape. This turns Kakishon from a map into a story. To continue, use Rayhan and other NPCs actively. If Rayhan comes with the party, don't let him fade into the background. Give him a purpose. Maybe he's studying the nature of Kakishon, investigating ancient structures, or working on a possible escape method. Perhaps some enemies fall into Kakishon with your adventurers. Let those villains regroup and evolve. Turn them into reoccurring threats, or build towards a final showdown inside the demiplane. Kakishon's big problem is that it's a hex crawl. Let's be honest, hex crawl structure here can be a little rough. So I don't run it like a true hex crawl. Instead, I'll pretend it's random, but behind the scenes, everything is carefully planned, session by session, almost like I'm writing a TV show. Each session is going to build on previous discoveries, player decisions, ongoing faction conflicts. Let the players feel freedom, but the story continues to feel strong. Random encounters shouldn't be random. True randomness will often kill your pacing. So instead, I like to build a little goodie bag of encounters. That goodie bag's going to have pre-selected monsters, prepared battle maps, designed scenarios for purpose. Then I choose or lightly randomize from that list when it's appropriate. This is going to keep encounters relevant, balanced, and more importantly, memorable. Expand the hunting system. The hunting system laid out by Jason Nelson is a great foundation, but I want more from it. When I go back, my goal is to make it feel like survival matters, tie it into the exploration and danger, and possibly expand it with a custom mechanics or rewards. This is the area I plan to deepen in future runs. The biggest problem with this big world is scope. At some point, every GM hits the same wall. I have to build an entire world? Kakishon can feel overwhelming. And, well, I've discovered something huge. A director's cut that changes everything. On the Paizo forums, I found a document called The End of Eternity, the Director's Cut. In the published version that you probably have, there are 40 pages covering the adventure, and the Director's Cut has 70 pages. That's 30 additional pages of content that didn't make it into the final book. 30 lost pages of Kakishon. My biggest feedback on what I'll do differently is I'm not going to run the printed adventure anymore. I'm going to be running the Director's Cut. This is actually a really important comparison for running End of Eternity, because the Director's Cut is not just a draft. It contains substantial additional content, tone shifts, and GM tools that never made it into the published AP. I went through both documents, and there are a few major differences that matter at the table, especially for you as a GM. And I'm going to be honest, this might be the difference between Kakishon feeling like a side quest and it becoming one of the best arcs in your entire campaign. The core difference is the published version is tight, structured, and focused on escaping Kakishon. It's clean, it works, it's very Paizo. But the Director's Cut, it turns Kakishon into a living, breathing world. More roleplay, more politics, freedom, and more story. It stops being a dungeon and starts feeling like a mini campaign. The factions are probably the biggest upgrade. In the published version, factions, well, they exist, but they mostly serve the plot. In the Director's Cut, factions are everything. You've got Proteans, Shaitans, and Oberak's faction. And they just don't sit there. They recruit the players, lie to them, manipulate them, compete for their loyalty. The party isn't just solving a problem anymore. They're being pulled into a political struggle. The pleasure palace at the center of Kakishon really gets a glow up. This part is a little wild. The pleasure palace in the published version, it's fine. And the Director's Cut, it's a full-blown roleplay hub. We're talking about grand feasts, illusions and performances, a magical observatory, a library that gives mechanical bonuses, and shape-changing servants. And yeah, it leans hard into the decadent Genie Paradise vibe. This is no longer a stop. It's going to be the centerpiece for your location. In the Director's Cut, roleplay is more supported. That's something I didn't expect. The Director's Cut actually helps you run roleplay better. It gives you NPC motivations, competing agendas, and even scripted encounters. Like, for example, Oberak contacting the party directly. Instead of, here's your quest, you get, here's why you should trust me and why the others are lying. Kakishon becomes more of an open world. In the published version, the island feels like, go here, do a thing. In the director's cut, it truly feels like a sandbox. You get crystal forests, ancient battlefields, frozen regions, the mausoleum of Nex, and most importantly, players can explore all in any order. This is where Kakishon finally feels like a real place. In the director's cut, the tone gets way darker. It's subtle at first, but powerful. The published version is more of a classic adventure tone. The director's cut, it gets uncomfortable in a good way. It's got hedonism, manipulation, moral ambiguity, and it really sells this idea that you're trapped in a magical paradise, but something is deeply wrong. The Proteans are actually characters. In the original version, the Proteans are mostly these weird chaos monsters that come off more like aliens. In the director's cut, they're a true faction. They will try to negotiate, offer a way for the players to escape, and warn that reality is falling apart and breaking. They're now not just enemies. They're a part of the philosophy of the setting. There's a huge shift where escaping is a story, not necessarily a system. In the published version, the escape is mechanical. It has to do with entropy pools, earth seeds, very clear rules. In the director's cut, escape really kind of depends upon your choices. Who you side with, what you accomplish, which faction wins. So instead of solve the puzzle, you more likely get to choose your ending. Now, there are some things you might want to keep from the published adventure path because you will lose some structure. That's kind of the trade-off here. The published version gives you clear rules, balanced encounters, defined progression. The director's cut is way lighter on mechanics. So yeah, you gain story, but lose structure. I think the best thing you could do is bring both those together to create the experience that you're trying to achieve. The opening in the director's cut is way more cinematic. It's going to be way cooler. There's a cyclone upon arrival. You get to see genie armies. You'll have Javul do a mid-air reveal. It's going to hit harder than how they present it in the published adventure. The director's cut is going to teach you how to run it. It might be the most underrated part. The director's cut straight up tells you how factions behave, how to run intrigue, what players might try to do in response to it, where the published version really just gives you encounters. The director's cut is going to give you tools. So here's the bottom line. The director cut is going to add deep faction politics, a real roleplay hub, sandbox exploration, a stronger tone, narrative-driven outcomes, some more cinematic moments, and overall better guidance for your game master. However, what the AP provided that it was lacking was clear mechanics, rules around escaping, and then more balance and structure. My recommendation, if you're running this, don't choose one, run a hybrid. You're going to use the published version for mechanics, balance, and systems, and then open up that director's cut for roleplay, factions, story, and atmosphere. Do that, and Kakishon stops being a weak middle chapter and becomes one of the best parts of your entire campaign. So, what's my final verdict? What do I actually think about the end of Eternity? This is one of the most ambitious modules in the Legacy of Fire. You're stepping into an entirely new world, a demiplane with multiple islands, competing factions, and the potential for a full sandbox experience. But on its own, it's a little divided. The published version is clean, structured, mechanically solid, but it can feel like travel here, complete the objective, move on. The director's cut is the opposite. It's rich with roleplay, politics, and more atmosphere. But it lacks the structure to fully support itself. But if you combine them, this becomes something special. If you let factions drive the story, turn the Pleasure Palace into a true hub, curate your encounters instead of rolling them, and treat Kakishon like a living world, then this module transforms. It stops being a disconnected side adventure and becomes a mini campaign inside your campaign. So for my ratings out of 10, I'm going to give End of Eternity an 8 out of 10. 9.5 out of 10 if you include the Director's Cut Hybrid. For dungeon design, I'm going to give it a 5 out of 10 because the dungeons are light and really more likely encounters that can be run in a single session. The world building potential is amazing and large in scope, and I'm going to say a 9.5 out of 10. The story out of the box, a 7 out of 10. For the GM effort required, I'm going to say very high. However, if you include the director's cut, I would have to say it's medium. This is not a plug-and-play adventure, but if you invest in it, it can become one of the most memorable arcs your players will ever experience. The Book 4 for Legacy of Fire, The End of Eternity. It's not the easiest module to run, but it might be the one for your players to remember forever. Looking for a copy of the director's cut? Leave me a comment and I will respond to it. If you've enjoyed my breakdown of The End of Eternity, make sure to like the video and subscribe for more Legacy of Fire content. Next up, we'll be diving into Book 5, The Impossible Eye, where things really start to escalate. And if you've run Kakishon at your table, I'd love to hear how it went in the comments below. Until next time, I'm GM Winslow, and I will see you at the table.